All right, welcome everybody to the first of 2025 edition of Legal Tech Week, the show where we talk about, well, usually talk about the top stories of the week in legal tech, but this week we're going to do our year in review show in which we talk about some of the top stories and trends that came out of 2024 in the worlds of legal tech and innovation and bears and whatever else was of interest to us. Uh, I actually went back and was looking at our show from last year and was, I don't know, kind of thinking that relatively speaking, this was sort of a boring year. Not quite as exciting as 2023 was in terms of all the stuff that was happening when we were just experiencing the whole first wave of Gen AI and hallucinations and everything else that came out of 2023. Seemed like a little bit of a quiet year, I guess. But well, we can talk about that. But let's first introduce ourselves. And we have sitting in with us today as a guest panelist, Mr. Greg Lambert. Greg, want to say hello?
Hi, I'm Greg Lambert. I'm the Chief Knowledge Services Officer at Jackson Walker. As my paying day job, as my costly second job, I podcast for The Geek in Review and am co-founder of Three Geeks and a Law Blog.
I need one of those paying day jobs. That would be a good thing to have.
Yeah.
And somebody else with a paying day job, Niki Black.
Uh, my name's, I don't know why I thought that was so funny. I'm sorry about
You don't get paid? Wait a minute.
It must not be a good paying job.
um, my
Hopefully
name's,
nobody from Affinipe is watching right now.
no, it was just, no, I get paid for great things. No, it's not that. It's just, I never thought other people have paying day jobs. That's so ridiculous. Anyway, my name is Niki Black. I'm the, come back to me. I got all flustered. Wait, I didn't introduce myself. My name
This
is
is
Niki
it.
Black. I'm the
What is your title du jour?
Principal Legal Insight Strategist at Affinipe, parent company of My Case, LawPay, DocuWise, and CasePeer. And I write legal tech columns for ABA Journal Above the Law and the Daily Record. And I'm all done. I'm signing off.
All right. And Stephanie, how about you? I won't comment on you
Um,
whether you have a paying day job or not.
I hope so. I did as of yesterday. I'm Stephanie Wilkins. I am the director of content at Legal Tech Hub and Go Irish, Notre Dame. Woohoo!
Yep. And all right, Julie, how about you?
Hi everyone. I believe I still have a paying day job. I am Julie Shabalali. I'm a freelance legal journalist. I write for Canadian Bar Association along with other publications in Canada and the US. Happy New Year.
All right. Well, turning to someone I'm pretty sure doesn't have a paying day job. I don't know, Steve.
Yeah, I was just thinking, Bob, when I left the full-time practice of law, to do what I do now, you would say, "Oh, you're going to make the big bucks, asshole."
Steve, I still
So yeah,
remember when you called me and told me you were going to start blogging and asked about how much money I make from it. And I think we both had a good laugh over that, but that was.
I'm Steve Embry. I write the blog Tech Law Crossroads about legal technology. I'm also a regular contributor on practice management for the Kentucky Bench and Bar magazine. And I am the current co-chair of ABA Tech Show, which will be in early April 2025.
Thank you. And somebody who most definitely has a paying day job, Joe Patrice.
Joe Patrice, yes, Joe Patrice from Above the Law and Thinking Like a Lawyer podcast. I am, uh, I kind of rolling into the new year a little slow. I've got a nasty cough, so if I mute myself a few times, that's what's going on.
Ooh, sorry to hear that. So, well, what do you think about that sort of general proposition I was talking about a little bit earlier? I mean, I was looking back. I mean, 2023, we had the case text acquisition by Thomson Reuters. We had all this hallucination stuff going on. We had GPT taking the bar exam. The whole some of the stuff we talked about last year, where the Fast Case VLEX merger, the whole do not pay debacle that happened in 2023. And then the Chief Justice of the United States coming out with his year-end message on generative AI and law. This year, I don't know, does it feel kind of tamer or a little less exciting this year, or are we just kind of all getting used to it all? Anybody have
I
thoughts?
mean, I think it's kind of the second. I said in our email chain, I was half joking when I was like, oh, I'll have to remember what happened this past year, but I was half not joking because I was like, what actually did happen this past year? I do think it's partly that we're all getting more used to it, so it's less of the buzz, which is a good thing, but on the other hand, it feels a little more boring.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with Stephanie. I think we're a little bit bored. I also reviewed what I wrote about this past year. And I think because we have all been writing about this for so long, right? I mean, and then the world caught up, and then law caught up, and then it like caught up in such a big way that 2024 was just more about that momentum that came in from 2023. And so, because if you ask the average person, they're going to have different thoughts about 2024. But I think for us, I think 2024 is more of all the big changes came. Now, what is like the actual substance of it? I think that was 2024, as not so much the buzz, but like the real nitty gritty. Not good with the metaphors at this point yet.
Yeah, the substance is far more boring than the hype. It's what you're saying.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, yes.
2024 was a much better year for music than it was for legal tech, I think. There was no big chaperone, I think, on the scene for legal tech. But I think, 2023 was a year of, kind of excitement of it being new. I think 2024 was a year of a large amount of investment, but not a lot of results. So I think that's probably why it was more muted, because there wasn't some big, this is what we did with AI. It was much more of, the news reports or the PR was more about implementation of certain things, but not necessarily what the outputs of that were doing. So we're not seeing that yet.
Yeah, I was thinking that sort of along the same lines, 2022, 2023, big announcements, lots of talk. 2024 sort of got down into, okay, what can these tools really do for us on a daily, day in, day out basis, and how legitimate will they really be in helping us solve problems? I think there's a lot of like feeling around, sort of let's get our feet underneath us and see what will work and maybe what won't work. And so that was, sort of gradual, incremental progress here and there.
I'm going to be the contrarian. And I'm going to point out that from 2008 until 2020, I wrote and spoke about the cloud computing. Like, I wrote a book. All I did was explain to lawyers what cloud computing was. I tried to get lawyers to use cloud computing, and it wasn't until the pandemic hit that people finally started to use cloud computing, more than like a third of the industry. So that's, 12, is that 12 years? I'm trying to think, like, no, more than, I forgot, 2008. I'm trying to think of the number I used. 2008, 12 years, right? Like 12 years, nothing happened. And well, I think what happened was, with everybody jumping into the cloud in 2020, it was such a huge rush of lawyers into tech. And then all of a sudden, generative AI comes along right when the pandemic finally kind of eases up, when you look at this from the big picture. And right, math is not my forte, clearly. But then you get back to, this technology has done a ton. I mean, we use it all the time. It may not be fully replacing lawyers at this point, but you really want that to happen in 2 years? I mean, I honestly think that it has, it's almost like we've gotten spoiled, because the pace of news, both in legal tech and otherwise, has been so rapid. And we're also used to immediate, like, dopamine hits from our phones, that if we're not constantly getting news every single day, but that's not huge breaking news. It's and I'm not, I'm not trying to like throw everyone under the bus here, but I'm just trying to take the big picture and look back at this. And I honestly think that a lot did happen, and there were tons of releases. They just were not earth-shattering releases. You know what I mean? But I think a lot actually did happen, and I feel very different than everybody else on this panel, apparently.
Well, speaking of
I guess I
dopamine
would.
from your
Oh,
phone, I mean, there was that Westlaw or Thomson Reuters ad where, the lawyer was out at happy hour and got, the message on his phone, and he forwarded it to co-counsel, which had it all ready for him when he got back to the office. I mean, still waiting for that to happen, but it was cool to.
I guess I would say, Nikki, to your comment, have to be careful when we talk about we. I mean, those of us on this roundtable, well, a lot of things happen. It was really cool, but I don't know, like in the law firm universe and the typical daily work of a lawyer, that's where I don't know how much has really happened. So
I don't
anyway,
know.
I think I'm actually saying, I think I agree with you more than you realize, Nikki. Maybe I just didn't say it as well. As I feel like generally it felt more boring because the stories weren't buzzy, they weren't whatever. But I'm not saying it was boring and nothing happened. I'm just saying in terms of like from a writing it and people reading stories, like it is the dopamine hit thing. Like practical implementations, I think are awesome. I'm still way on the AI train. They're just in terms of like news, not as they're just not as fun to write about and they're not as fun to read, I guess. So
Yeah, I mean, if I've been following this stuff for even longer than you, Nikki. I mean, this was actually the 30th year of my writing about legal tech, and there's tons of stuff happening. I mean, it's so amazing to see what's happening. But I think what all I was trying to say was that in 2022 and 23, there was so much buzz about how quickly and dramatically generative AI was going to change the practice of law. And here along comes 2024, and this is kind of the year in which we thought we were going to start to see all that. And I don't know that we really have. I mean, we've seen cool stuff, very cool tools come along. I think some of the AI tools that companies like yours, Nikki, and others have implemented in their platforms are doing very cool stuff, but it's not totally transforming the practice of law. There was that article that I don't know if you guys saw the article that Greg linked to in our notes for the show, but and it talks about Jordan Furlong, who's prone, I think, to a little bit of overstatement, perhaps, of how close the future is to
He's
arriving sometimes.
enthusiastic.
He's enthusiastic, and so there was an article that Greg posted, which kind of takes a step back from that and says, well, are we really going to be changing law practice that transformatively, or at least that quickly? And I don't know if that's true. So I just felt like, in a way, 2024 is almost like a little bit of a correction on some of the hype in a sense, and it just kind of slowed it down a little bit.
But I feel like when
Well,
I've spoken to lawyers at conferences, there's so much curiosity and there's so many different ways that they're using it. And even on New Year's Eve, I was at a friend's house who's a lawyer, and there was a local judge there, trial court level in New York. And I had this conversation with him where he initially was like, well, I don't know, like, what's everyone even using AI for? And like, how can I said, well, Illinois just came out, the Supreme Court with for judges with like a whole all these guidelines, and it's being adopted quickly. And I know here's all the different ways I've heard of judges using it. And then when I was halfway through, he's like, oh yeah, well we definitely used the Thomson Reuters legal research thing, and it was really cool, and it really sped things up. So he started the conversation off by saying, how's anyone even using it? And in fact, they'd actually used it in his chambers in a way that actually was beneficial. So I sometimes think like people start off skeptical even when they're using it. And it really does feel to me like there is an uptick in usage. And over the next year, when we start to really see those in deeply embedded functionalities, it's going to really take off. But, it takes time to build those out. And in the meantime, there are some really cool, like you mentioned, features rolled out in platforms, including ours, that were really, not earth shattering, but they were useful, and our lawyers are very responsive.
Yeah.
This
And when you
reminds
put it
me
that
of
way, if you look at
this reminds me of the big story that I had at one point on this show in the middle, somewhere in the middle of the year, about how maybe this is as good as it gets. There are upper bounds to how good AI can get, and we're hitting a lot of those. So it may not be able to do much more than it does now, but that doesn't mean it's not still capable of delivering a lot of cool stuff. And I think you're right. Like what we have now will continue to be deployed in more and more useful ways for people. But it's not going to be earth shattering until there's a more earth shattering answer to either the energy or water usage or quantum computing kind of thing. Until some other outside exogenous solution comes, AI is not going to get much better than this. But that doesn't mean it's not useful.
Well, now
Yeah,
I'm like completely second guessing my entire first reaction to all of this, because now I'm reminded of the article that Greg put in the chat that we shared amongst ourselves before we came on here. I read that article and I was like so vehemently against it. I was like, this guy is totally wrong. Maybe I am more of the like hyperbolic Jordan Furlong camp. But I'm like, that guy, I thought completely, I don't remember who wrote it. I just read the article and being like, I thought that completely dismissed everything we've accomplished and it completely undersold how much is happening. Because like that article acts like every lawyer is spending most of their time arguing in court and counseling clients. And I'm like,
Yeah.
have you ever met a junior associate? And there's a lot of them.
It was very Pollyannish about
Yeah.
what lawyers do and how human-centric they are, when in reality, there's a lot of their time that is spent behind the desk with pen or with computer, where they are not interacting with people, and it's that part. And it was Robert Diab, who's a law professor in Canada, that wrote the article. But I think he kind of glossed over that part, whereas the articles that were mentioned about the reduction in time, I mean, really, you look at and Toby Brown and I took some data, and the number of times of edited, or it's like drafted, edited, wrote, and time entries was like 40 some odd percent of the work. And if just a small fraction of that gets removed from billable time into AI time, it will take a hit. And I think it's not beyond the pale to think that automation of boring tasks, repetitive tasks, are something that AI is going to actually do.
Yeah, if I can comment on that article as well from Robert, I totally agree with what y'all are saying, and I was speaking about being bored personally. I actually think, because I want to write about quantum computing and all the other things that Joe was mentioning, but I think there's a huge cultural shift that's already happened. I think I said this last year, and I think we've actually crossed the bridge without even knowing it. To dismiss that document preparation and document review can be done quicker. As Niki said, people were talking about that for decades to try and get lawyers to use that tech. Now, if you don't use it, you're probably gonna, get a complaint from a client saying, "Why aren't you using technology to review my documents?" Like there's just, those conversations are over, and so I actually think it was a transformative year. I'm thinking of lawyers that I spoke to who are not in big firms, who are in smaller regional places in Canada. Like I'm thinking like Nova Scotia and Saskatchewan, places that people don't know about. They're using AI. Their clients are asking them to use generative AI. You're telling me that's not transformative? And I think for us, it's harder to write about those stories because they still have some of the questions that we've talked about in previous shows about, what is really hallucinations, what are the best ways to use the technology. And that's where I do kind of side with Jordan on, really the optimistic point of view. The fact that they're even asking those questions is really, 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 really good. Because we were trying to explain to people what cloud computing even is pre-pandemic. And at least lawyers know what generative AI, they at least know those words. Like that's a huge change in 2024.
Yeah. Well, let me do my own course correct, or my own stepping back here, because I mean, I totally agree with everybody's saying. I think that there's major changes going forward, and that there have been major changes. I think really what I was talking about in terms of 2024 being kind of boring compared to 2023 was more from a journalism perspective, more from a headline grabbing perspective. There just weren't, I mean, Casetext getting acquired by Thomson Reuters in 2023, that was a huge story. That was a big one that everybody was talking about. Was that even 2023 or that was 2022?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was 2023. That was also the year that Casetext even came out with co-counsel in the first place, 2022-3. And the Fastcase VLEX merger was just a huge story. There haven't been kind of those big headline grabbing stories this year. I mean, I would say the only one that really jumped out as a single story that really grabbed the headlines was the was the Clio $900 million investment just because of the dollar amount. Well, not just because of the dollar amount there, but that was a huge dollar amount, and I think that was a really significant moment for the whole legal tech industry in terms of recognizing the potential. And I know a couple of people have already mentioned investments and what's been happening on that front in legal tech. But so I think 2024, there was a lot that happened. There was a lot of forward movement, but it was almost felt more more incremental in a way than these giant, headline grabbing moments that captivated us the year before.
It's hard to keep up with, the fastest moving year of technology ever, and so many headlines that we couldn't even keep up with them, so
Yeah.
I think it's like we stand a chance of keeping up now. And I think Julie said it, we sort of crossed that bridge without even realizing. And I think that's a big part of it too. And sorry, Joe, I don't agree that this is as good as it gets and we've capped out on this. I do think a lot more is going to keep happening, but it's not necessarily as sexy as people thought in 2023. It's not the big splashy stuff. Like we crossed that bridge without even realizing it, So we're getting there, and I think we're still getting there, and there's more and more cool stuff coming out. And I know at the very end we'll talk about maybe what's coming in 2025, but yeah, it's still there. It's still going. It's just not as every little deployment of it isn't as splashy as, oh, we have this big new thing that everybody all learned about at the exact same time.
Yeah. All right. Well, so that's maybe some broad characterizations around the year, but I'm wondering now what were some of the particular trends or stories that jumped out at all of you. Niki, I wonder if you want to start. I mean, you did your ABA journal piece, kind of wrapping up what you saw as some of the key trends, and that could be a good starting point for us to kind of talk about what some of the news was this year and what jumped out.
Yeah, sure. Let me drop that in the chat. So every year at the end of the year, Victor Lee and I go, he's my editor at the ABA Journal and also a panelist here most of the time. He's not here today.
Couldn't make it today.
Yeah, we go over, the big trends that we think that we're seeing, and I, include them in this article. And one of them was, so there were 5 major trends I identified. Generative AI as a legal software interface. This is something we'd all been talking about when we came back from Legal Week and sort of moving into ABA Tech Show. And it's just the idea that companies were beginning to use, and again, not earth shattering, but they're using generative AI at the, the dashboard of their software, oftentimes to help the users access information more readily or run more complex analytics that were sometimes needed someone internally within the firm that understood how to run those analytics to get the particular types of data output that you need. And they're starting to have sort of these either chatbots or interfaces with like drop-down menus that will allow you to get into the data and the information that you need more quickly and more streamlined. So I think that that's a significant use case. Not all software is user-friendly. It should be, but it isn't. And the more complex it gets, the more software gets developed and the more features are added onto, the more difficult it is to actually understand what it does, which is, a problem that users have. They want all these features, but then they don't know where they're located or how to access them as they get added on. So it's just a way to make the interface better. So I think that's actually significant, and it's a really interesting use case. And then I'm sort of segueing into point 2, better access to firm data with AI. Another trend that we're starting to see that I think we're going to see even more next year is that the way that everybody's talking about their plans for using AI is to have it almost as a knowledge management center, and I use that term very broadly, for all of a law firm's data, not simply their litigation data or memorandum of law or whatever the case may be, but all of the law firm's data, whether it's practice management and financial data, document management, intake and lead intake and CRM. So, when you can start to easily access all that information rather than having to, the equivalent of sticking your head in someone's office and saying, remember we wrote that memo on that case that time, can you remember the name of the matter? This way it's a much easier way to access that information. And then AI powers investment in growth in legal tech. And For this section, I focused on really the significant AI investment that we saw, and it's just, we can, I think we're going to talk about that more because I saw that listed. But that's another thing, is just the significant investment. Not, I don't think it's quite as big overall as it had been in the prior year or two, but it's still pretty significant. And the vast majority of it was into AI-powered technologies or plans to develop that technology. And then the back to office debate, there was a huge push and pull, both within our industry and outside of it, between employees and employers, about getting back to the office and the value of it, face to face, and how important that is. And then finally, the regulatory shifts that are changing legal practice. And the two major ones that we really focused on, that I think are also the two major ones, are the bar examination changes, how some states are experimenting with that, and then also some more of those sandboxes, allowing unlicensed professionals to practice law in limited areas, and then also an alternative one that we didn't actually include, but I think is also going to be more significant moving forward, is lawyers having owning parts of firms or all of firms, kind of like what we're seeing in a liberalization that you're seeing in like the UK and Australia. So those are like the big themes that I really hit on in my article.
I think that about covers it.
And that wraps up today's show.
And
I was just going to say, that was so well done.
No, I mean, there's so much to pick apart there. And Greg, you also did a sort of variation of sorts on the top themes of the year. Do you want to tell people about what you did? Because it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So, and Bob was actually ahead of the curve on this one with using Notebook LM to do his part of his podcast. But like the week after Bob did it, the folks at
Or I was
Google
really lazy
opened
that week.
but you sounded great. But the folks at Notebook LM opened up another option, which if you've used it, you know that you can input data, you can give it websites, or you can paste in text or PDFs, and then it actually has a two-person podcast style audio overview, which I think is probably, if we're looking forward, the things like using images, using audio, video going forward, I think is going to be much more ingrained in what we think of with being able to use the AI tools. So they now allow you to kind of interact with that audio overview with those two podcast hosts. So you can click a button and they will stop talking and basically ask you, what you want. And then you can ask it questions, you can inject ideas into it, or even tell them to move in a different direction or get off a certain topic. So it's really cool. So I ingested all 50 transcripts from my podcast from 2024 and talked with these AI podcast hosts to review all of the episodes that we did. So we had a series from Legal Week. We had a Love in Legal Tech where we had, I think, 9 episodes where we had couples in legal tech come on the show together and talk about what they're doing, also their personal relationship. And then all of the other things, including the very last episode where we had Niki and Sarah Glassmeyer on, which I thought was going to be our year end until this option came open. But it was really interesting. I did, in all clarity, I edited it because it can take a few seconds between the time that you click the button and give it an answer or give it a question, and then when it picks up. So I shortened that, so just for convenience sake. But the conversation flows very well. And it's a very interesting way of taking lots of information and interacting with that information in a clearly novel way that is even better to me than just typing in a prompt or a question or a follow-up for it. So it kind of gives you much more of a human interaction than a machine interaction, if that makes sense. And I think if anyone's listened to that, I think it really kind of shows some potential in how to take large amounts of information and work with it in a unique way.
It's scary good. I mean, I was saying to Greg before we started recording today that if you had no idea what Notebook LM was and you just happened to come across a podcast created using Notebook LM, you would think these people are kind of interesting and they have some good insights and some good thoughts on things. And it's just really kind of scary how good it is. And then the fact that Greg is able to kind of interact with it and prod it with questions made it that much better. I again already told people before we started recording, but for the sake of our audience, I will say the line of the year that came out of the Notebook LM here, where they were talking about the episodes that Greg did earlier this year on what you call it, legal tech relationships.
Love and legal tech.
Love and like couples who are in the legal tech world. And one of the Notebook LM speakers commented, quote, "The legal tech industry is a breeding ground for love." That's the funniest quote. So
Is that our predictions for 2025?
Yeah.
maybe.
There was one thing that I did want to point out as far as kind of a big story that I thought was my story of the year was the Stanford report that came out that attempted the benchmarking of the legal research tools that have AI using RAG techniques to do that. And while I think the report was seriously flawed in some of the things that they did, I think if you kind of take the messenger out of the message, I think the message was that a lot of these big vendors were really overhyping, over marketing what their tools could do and what some of the limitations were. If and Niki and I were talking about this when she was on the podcast, if you're wordsmithing and splitting hairs so much that, it's like, well, if it comes back and it's not actually hyperlinked, that's not truly a hallucination because it's doing what we're telling it to do, and that is cite the resources. And so even though it completely made up this section, because there's not a hyperlink, you as the user should know that was just made up. Therefore, it's not a hallucination. So it was, I'm not sure how the marketing and legal team got together and wordsmith that so that they could then say a hallucination-free product, but somehow they did. And I think that was one very valuable thing that came out of something that had a number of issues with it.
But that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier in the show today, in terms of some of the dampening of the enthusiasm from 2023 to 2024. That was, that was one of the first things that happened this year that tempered some of the buzz around what was going on with Co-Counsel and Westlaw and LexisNexis, and had people at least thinking a little bit more about how effective these things really were, how well they were really working.
Yeah, I did. For the 2-year anniversary of ChatGPT, I did an article that focused on what has and has not changed in terms of what was the focus in 2023 and what was the focus in 2024. And there were a couple of things that didn't change, but most of it that did change, I think it can all be put in the bucket of this was really exciting and then this was more sobering and realistic of 2023 versus 2024. So not less newsworthy and not less, I don't know, boring. Maybe boring is not the right word, but more sobering, more, deflating the bubble a little bit.
Yeah. The other thing I point out, Greg, about your piece is that ultimately it ended up with kind of a outline of some of the key themes of the year, and it was pretty interesting how much yours and Nikki's aligned with each other. I mean, obviously Gen AI is going to be, anybody putting together an outline of that is going to be Gen AI, but uh, you know, uh,
Yeah,
some of the other things that
well,
came out of
yeah,
yours were also
there
some of
were a
what
number
came
of
out of.
things. I think probably the biggest one is security and transparency that's going on. Uh, every time we have an advancement in technology, whether it's databases, it's cloud, it's AI, the biggest obstacle in the legal industry is just the trashy data that we have. And so, it's whenever there's a transition like this, the first thing we do is, oh God, we got to hire a bunch of data stewards to come in because all of our data is crap. So I think we're seeing that a lot as well. Um, I we had more talk about flat fee models. If we're going to if AI is going to try to take a bunch of the work, and it's again, as my friend Toby Brown says, it's a death by 1,000 cuts. Yeah, if you start cutting all these hours, after a while, that's going to catch up to you. And so I think that it's one of those things where year in, year out, we talk about going to alternative fee models, to flat fee models, but I think it's still at 9% of the legal work for large law firms is flat fee, and it's been 9% for like 12 years. So it hasn't improved.
Yeah,
But
that was one of two topics that I said had not changed from 2023 to 2024 at all.
Not a bit. Getting rid of the billable hour, flat fees. I think there's a number of things. Yeah, I think some of the things we're seeing a lot of some inspiration for the AI tools to help with access to justice issues. And Nikki and Sarah and Marlene talked about this. I think there's going to be a lot of access to justice, self-help that people are going to take upon themselves. That the legal industry, I think we have flat out failed to help with the access to justice issue, regardless of the past 25 years that I've been in the industry. It has not improved one little bit. In fact, I think it's probably gotten worse. But I think you're seeing, we kind of saw a buzz on this on X yesterday when there was someone at a startup that said a lawyer charged him $5,000 and took 2 months or something like that to get back a memo to him. He was able to take the same question and ask Claude, got something back immediately that was just as good as what he got from the lawyer. Now, there's a whole bunch of issues surrounding that. But if it's up to the person that's got the legal issue to take $5,000 and invest it in an answer, or to take a risk on putting it into an AI and getting an answer that's probably going to be pretty close. If they're willing to take that risk, I think you're going to see more and more people take that risk. And I think it's going to clear up a bunch of stuff way before it hits the courts. So you hear people taking on their HOAs, you hear people negotiating their lease renewals, or getting their refund back from deposits using AI tools. And so I think, whether the legal industry does anything or not, I think people are going to take it upon themselves to use some of these tools to help them handle these legal situations.
Yeah, and those people would never be, a lot of those people would never be going to a lawyer in the first place anyway. So it's not like it's not like they're compromising on the result they would have gotten when they went to a lawyer, because they wouldn't have been going to a lawyer. So they're getting a better result than they would have had.
You're reminding me, Greg, of a travel conference I went to. It's for travel hackers, because that's the hobby I picked up during COVID because, travel hacking during the pandemic. But I went to a panel that was only about that last topic you just mentioned, how to solve legal problems related to travel using generative AI. And it was well done, right? Like how to draft letters to hotels, travel agents, all of it. And I was just surprised by how well the information was conveyed. As somebody who's written about and done projects on access to justice for years, that's already happening. I don't think we've captured it very well. I wrote about this earlier this year about self-represented litigants already going to court using generative AI to help them draft stuff, get evidence, all the like. And the fact that that's already hitting the courts tells me that it's already happening thousands of times, if not millions of times already.
I don't know if people are there's coming up this month the Legal Services Corporation Innovations in Tech Conference, which I've gone to a number of times. I raved about it last year, but that conference is going to be in Phoenix, but it's going to be bookended the day before and the day after by two separate conferences organized by different people focusing on AI and access to justice. And they've got some really good programs planned. Kristen Sonday is organizing the day before one. And then I think it's Arizona State University and Stanford are collaborating on the day after one, which is a little bit more sort of academic focused on doing research into the impact of AI on access to justice. But if you're interested in this topic, you might want to check out those conferences. What about some of the other panelists here? What kind of jumped out to you? I mean, were there themes other than what we've talked about here, or particular aspects of them that you kind of wanted to point out?
I mean, you already mentioned the Clio funding, but I had just picked massive fundings in general. That one obviously being the biggest, but yeah, we're not back to, the peak years of all of the funding, but we've seen some major fundraisers this year, and I think we're going to keep seeing that more. So, I mean, that looking back, I know LTN did a good slideshow of some of the biggest ones of this year. I'll try to find it and drop it in here. But yeah, so those were some of the biggest news announcements that stood out to me looking back. So there's still definitely money coming in. And I agree with Niki that a lot of it is almost solely geared at AI. But yeah, curious to see where that keeps going. And I kind of along with it, not the same thing, but consolidation as well.
I think there's another piece to the funding puzzle that isn't something that we have talked about significantly because it hasn't been relevant in our industry, which is now that there's a lot more private equity investment in the industry, and they tend to not share the funding rounds or the investment that's being, not funding rounds, but the investment that's being made. There's a whole invisible layer of funding and money coming into the industry, for lack of a better way of describing it, that isn't being discussed. And the funding's all getting a lot more complex, right? Because when you have multiple venture capital funding partners or multiple PE, and then someone comes in and buys the other one out, or whatever the case may be in the particular structure you're talking about, a lot of the money that gets funded goes to pay off the prior investors, right? So the funding round isn't as big as it looks. And that happens both in the venture capital and the PE space. So the funding isn't as simple as it used to be when it was Series A or B or whatever the case may be. So there's a whole additional layer, and I don't think that we have a full visibility into what it actually looks like. So I think there's actually a lot more coming in than we even are aware of.
Why is that I've never understood why it is that some of those private equity investors are more reticent about talking about the deals than the VCs are? Do you have any sense of that, or?
I actually don't. I think there's just strategic, my guess. I mean, I honestly don't know. I don't know why venture capital tends to yell it from the rooftops and PE doesn't. I think it's just different spaces and different strategies and different approaches and different cycles, even in terms of investment cycles, right? Like, they come in at a certain time and they have an exit plan, and they want to, within a certain amount of time, exit with a certain amount above that what they'd invested. And I think I don't know enough about venture capital. I've never been involved in venture capital, and I regret to say that I'm not quite high up enough at the company to be running around talking to the PE people constantly. I have spoken to some of them, but not about anything this in depth, and certainly not, I don't have a real big in-depth understanding of how that stuff works. I might go ask ChatGPT. I'm going to go ask ChatGPT right now and enter the response in the in the chat in a minute. I don't know the answer.
Maybe that's part of what the private meant all along. Maybe.
Yeah, I'm assuming private and you know, to the comment just put in the chat, I'm assuming private equity likes to keep things private because sometimes their strategy is to slash and burn, and you know, there's other agendas at play and other strategies at play that they don't want other PEs to know. Whereas VCs, depending on the type of investment funds they create, they want to shout it to the rooftops because they have an agenda of we're going to corner this market, or you know, if you're looking for funding, we're the place that you want to go, right? And I've talked to VCs about that before. I'm very concerned about PE funding coming into our market. I think it's already occurring. I've spoken to entrepreneurs off the record in Canada who have said that, you know, some of the companies, the reason why some of the companies are going certain places as others aren't is because of this PE funding. And you know, and I know Kristen, you mentioned her, Bob, in terms of access to justice. This is a really huge issue because they fund companies that tend to not be, you know, run by women or people of color, and this is an issue in VC market and technology that is not just legal tech. And so as this happens, we're going to have bigger issues of who is actually running these companies and funding these companies, and what are their agendas? Because we already know there's not equal access to funding for legal tech companies. We already know that's true. And as this becomes more mainstream, as Dave mentioned, we don't want to be like retail or healthcare in terms of the market because of all of the issues that are raised with legal tech and, you know, access to justice and all of that colliding. That is not a good look for our industry. So this is something I'd love to look into as well. Let me know what ChatGPT says about the answer, the question that Bob asked, because this is also something I'm curious about.
Well, I had done the series I wrote earlier this year that we've talked about on the show, but the kind of the roll up in the law practice management industry of private equity companies buying up all the different practice management companies, and they did some of them did that pretty quietly, and you know, I think that's one of the reasons I wrote about it is I think people didn't understand that rolling up was happening. And there are arguments to be made that was a good thing. There's arguments to be made is not a good thing. I think it ultimately depends on the set of companies and the private equity fund and whatever else. But it is something that does not happen as conspicuously as all the big VC deals. That's for sure.
I'm gonna have to read it because apparently Zoom doesn't let you copy and paste, which kind of makes sense so you don't spam everybody. I'll summarize. I asked, you know, why does VC share it and make a big deal out of it, and why does PE not? And it said VC firms often announce it for branding and credibility, attracting future deals, marketing the portfolio. On the other hand, PE typically don't for several reasons: confidentiality. It says that they often involve mature, established companies with sensitive financial info, which can disrupt ongoing or negotiations. I don't know. Longer investment horizon, less focus on marketing. In short, VCs benefit from announcing investments to build a reputation and network, while PE firms focus on strategic, low-key transactions that don't necessitate public announcements. And I will say that when it comes to PE firms, there are PE firms that turn things apart, and there are PE firms focused on growth, and they're two very different things, two different animals almost. And so I think that the type of PE firm that's coming in can make a really big difference, like you'd alluded to, Bob.
Yeah, right. Steve, what about you? Was there anything else that you jumped out at you this year that we haven't talked about?
No, I think the thing that I noticed was something that Niki picked up on too, and that's the use of the large language models on internal law firm data and materials. And particularly for larger firms, I think that just opens so many possibilities and opportunities. Even in large firms, you have various partners that sort of silo their practice and silo how they do things, and you know, being able to look across the firm to see what works best and maybe what's been successful and maybe what's been most efficient. Using those models will kind of reduce some of that silo effect and maybe standardize some of the practices within law firms. Not to mention, and to Niki's point, that the ability to use the tools on billing and invoicing and time spent, gives you the opportunity to begin to make better estimates. One of the problems with alternative fees that some firms have is just sort of the innate reluctance to risk because, well, we don't really know how much time it's going to take, and it all just depends. You have a better way to ascertain that. Maybe that breaks down some of the fear and concern. So, as those models develop and get more sophisticated with internal materials, I think we can see a lot of change, positive change come out of that. So I thought that was an interesting development. I know NetDocs was big into that, and VLEX and iManage have formed that partnership to try to mine that stuff. So could be interesting to see how that pans out over the year.
Yeah. Joe, what about you? Was there anything else you had?
And the only other thing that I had for this year was just one of the stories I wrote about the Clio report that came out, which was that firms' ability to engage with their clients got worse from the last time they studied it. So while we talk about these newfangled ways to bring law practice into the future, everyone's already getting dumber. They are already not returning phone calls there more than they used to. They're already not returning emails more than they used to. We need to, as a whole profession, we need to consider that maybe we're broken in ways that aren't going to be fixed by by clinging to the idea that we've got a tech solution.
I was
Answer the
reminded when you
phone.
said that, Joe, the study that they did of people that a group of people made inquiries to real doctors and a group of people made inquiries to generative AI tools, and they liked the responses from the generative AI tools better.
I mean, well, I having talked to some doctors recently, I understand that a lot of them aren't.
Right.
They didn't get that job for their powers of communication, let's say.
Right.
All right. Well, should we take a few moments and go around and see if we have any predictions for next year? Next January 2026, when we sit down here to talk about the top stories of January 2025. I mean, of the year 2025. What are we going to be? What's going to have been the big thing? What are we going to be talking about? Stephanie, what about you? You just wrote about this, so
Yeah.
you just made some predictions.
Yeah, I made a bunch, but at least in the first half of the year, agents are going to be the big story. A year from now, we'll be talking about how well that panned out and how agents ended up where they worked and where they didn't. But if I had to pick one word going into 2025, it's agents or agentic.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Word of the year, almost.
I'm
Not
going
quite.
to say it's fraud.
Lost
Agentic fraud is what I'm going to say. Not necessarily limited to legal, but absolutely happening in legal too, with like lawyers being defrauded and, some of the things I included in my newsletter that Facebook is now going to roll out fake profiles and the level of fraud that's happening in terms of it's given fraudsters is the only word I can think of. It's not, I can't duplicate, whatever. It's given these bad actors the ability to defraud people at a grand scale, and it's only going to escalate. And I think it's just going to decimate the online world. It's going to decimate people's bank accounts. It's going to decimate lawyers' bank accounts. I think it's going to be fraud, and agentic fraud.
Niki, it's interesting that you said that because I just did a draft of an article talking about with the increased in sort of lying and hyperbole and exaggeration in public life, is that going to encourage lawyers to be more dishonest, if you will, in the courtroom and in their arguments and what they say to judges, and judges who are already overworked and don't know who in the hell's telling the truth to begin with, because we no longer have that sort of, Embry appears in my courtroom once a week, so I kind of know when he says something, it's really complete BS or, whatever. We're losing that. And so I would sort of speculate over the next year, is that situation going to get worse? And what does that mean for our system of justice if it does?
Also fraudulent evidence too, right? You just
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, one of the points that I made is it's not just the deep fakes. You know, I mean, you take like expert witnesses who now can, you know, are they going to be even more grandiose in what they say they can do and their qualifications to the point that they are a deep fake. It's not just what they're giving you is a deep fake, but their uh, whole person is almost a deep fake. It's just, I mean, it's a very troubling, you know, as an ex-litigator, it's a very troubling time to be thinking about how are the good guys going to combat all of that stuff.
Although because of all the deepfakes and hallucinations and everything else, maybe judges are going to be that much more diligent about looking for this stuff now, and maybe ultimately that'll all balance out in some way. I don't know.
Maybe, but you know, the part of the problem is, at least at the state court level, it's a resource problem. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
they don't have the ability and the tools and anything to sort of, you know, ferret out truth. And it's
Yeah.
that's what I worry about. I mean, the federal judges at least have something. And maybe, as you say, Bob, and I made this point, it's a sensitization question to begin with, but you don't have much more beyond that between you know, Susan and Joe, which one is really being completely candid with the court? How do you know?
Susan,
You know?
Susan, I can tell you this.
Well, yeah, Joe was a poor example. Sorry.
All right.
As soon
Any
as I
other
said it, I knew.
any other quick predictions for next year? Julie, got any predictions for next year?
Yeah, I was debating between deepfake and copyright, which both sound really old, but given where we are this year, but I actually think encryption might be the word of the year. And what I'm alluding to is what Nikki is saying in terms of cybersecurity. Because quantum computing is we've talked about this before, going where it's going. I think we're going to have some sort of major hack or some sort of incident. I'm just even thinking of the drones from last month. Like, we're going to have some sort of major incident related to, but I thought the data was encrypted or something, and we kind of would have crossed that Rubicon. That's my big bold prediction. It sounds very techy, but because we have so much data flowing in places that we're not sure where it is and where it's living, I think this is actually going to become a very live issue in the future. I'm putting together a pitch about this, so this is why it's been on my mind. How do you combine deep fakes and cybersecurity and copyright? What's the one thing kind of putting them all together? It's this issue of encryption and that everything is protected behind a password. That is going to be tested, I think, in 2025.
Bring back blockchain.
Yeah, it's back.
Yes, I just want to write about blockchain again, Bob. But you're right, Bob.
Are we going to skip PDOOM? Is it too early in the year to do PDOOM?
Wait, I
Yeah,
want
I guess,
to
let's
point
get
one
see if,
thing
yeah,
out.
let's. I don't know if we have Greg or Joe. Do you have any other predictions you want to throw out there?
Yeah, I have a quick one,
Well,
and
I
that
see,
is
yeah.
we haven't even talked about the new administration that's coming in and everything. So I politics aside, I think the economy is going to burn like white hot for the next 2, maybe 3 years. And that the regulations are going away. You're going to see lots of mergers. So you're going to see an industry that's going to be where its lawyers, I think, are going to be super, super busy. And that's not necessarily a good thing for the tech part of it, because it's very hard to get busy lawyers to adopt new tech. So I think probably we're going to be talking next year about how 2025 was even a more boring year, news and tech wise, than 2024. But hold on to your hats, because an economy that burns white hot fizzles out. And so I think we're probably the equivalent of 2006 now. If everyone remembers, that was really good times for law firms. Get ready. It's going to get interesting in about 2 or 3 years.
I'm going to combine the two last points. I think cybersecurity is the biggest issue coming up. We finally get back to something real after this AI stuff. And I also want to tie it to the administration, because I think that's a big part of it. The incoming administration has already said that they're going to slash spending for cybersecurity stuff. They're going to start a trade war with a global cyber threat. They're going to reject the UN Cyber Treaty. They put in charge of Homeland Security the only governor in the country who rejected cybersecurity block grants. We are dealing with a situation where we are going to provoke cyber attacks with zero protection from the government. We are in a really bad place, and law firms, being the soft underbelly of a lot of this stuff, means that they are going to be the people who are going to be attacked. And so we are back to a world where everybody needs to care about cybersecurity more.
So do we need to know your PDUM score?
Yeah,
Joe?
so who
Or
needs a
do-
PDUM score?
All right, there we go. That kind of replaced it.
I think we pretty much covered it. The funny thing is that as we closed out last year's show, the final topic we talked about, Gene brought this up, who's retired from our show now, but was Elon Musk and what impact he was going to be having on technology and the economy over the coming year. So here we are coming back to where we were a year ago, I guess, in some ways.
I was just
But,
gonna say, can we get a complete Cybertruck recall this year?
Yeah.
That's wishful thinking, Stephanie. I feel
Yeah.
like it. No, I was about to make a poor joke and I stopped myself. But yeah,
But was
That's
it
the
a
hardest part.
bomb, or is it just built to do that?
I mean, even before the other day, I was on board with a Cybertruck recall. So
Yeah. Tesla sales are quite a bit down this year. So.
Yeah. Has anyone seen a woman actually driving one of those Cybertrucks?
Has anybody seen a person driving one of those Cybertrucks? I've just seen the trucks, but it's kind of hard to see
yeah, I
what's
went to
inside them.
I went to a football game in New Jersey a couple months ago, and as we were in traffic getting to, I almost said the Meadowlands, whatever it is now, MetLife, we were just playing Spot the Cybertruck. We saw at least 5 of them in different colors, and yeah.
All right. Well, next year we will be back to talk about how many Cybertrucks are still on the road and other things. But thanks to all of you. It was a good show, interesting conversation, and hope you all have a very happy and prosperous and fulfilling year going forward, not just the panelists, but everybody listening. And we'll be back here next week, I guess, to talk about what's happened back in the more mundane week-to-week developments of legal tech.
Let's hope.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Bye.